The year was 1848. All over the European continent, revolutions were erupting. There was no single factor which spurred these revolutions, but similar conditions were rampant throughout Europe. Severe food shortages from poor grain and potato harvests, depressed commercial and industrial economies, widespread unemployment, overburdened systems of port relief, wretched living conditions in the cities, in England. The example set by the Anti-Corn Law League inspired the continental Europeans to act. They too wanted to peacefully obtain better rights for the working class, and so the citizens of France, the Habsburg Empire, Italy, and Germany revolted against their governments. Within the next few minutes, we'll go behind the scenes with some of those present during these revolutions. As they tell their stories, we hope that this inside look on their revolutions will provide new insight on to what it was really like to live during 1848.
Hi, I'm on the scene here with Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, also known as Little Napoleon.
That's Emperor Napoleon to you, and I'm more famous than you'll ever be.
Okay, Mr. Bonaparte, why don't you tell us a little bit about the start of the Second French Revolution?
What is there to say, really? That scumbag Louis Philippe and his minister Guizot was so corrupt that no one could handle it anymore. The liberals did a good job of throwing those two out as quickly as they could. And then the liberals started this new government. And they even had an election based on universal male suffrage to choose the new National Assembly. But they ultimately failed too, and that's where I came in.
What was your role?
I, nephew of the great Napoleon Bonaparte, was elected president in 1848. I had twice before tried to get rid of the July monarchy, and now the people saw me as a source of stability. Why not? I was absolutely outstanding at everything I did.
What happened when you actually got into office?
The National Assembly was unrelenting. They refused to acknowledge that I, not they, now represented the will of the nation. Then in 1851, they refused to let me run for office, so I showed them. On December 2nd, 1851, I seized power, and the plebiscite supported me. 1 year later, I became Emperor Napoleon III.
Well, thank you very much, Emperor. One last thing. I see you're reading a newspaper there. What is that?
Oh, just a little voix de femme that those women write. They think they deserve to be equal as men. Can you believe that? But after they arrested those two leaders, Janine Duron and Pauline Renaud, you can be sure that this little girl power movement won't be around for much longer.
Okay, thank you, Emperor. Well, now I'm here with Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand, who saw uprisings in Vienna and Italy, as well as amongst the Magyars. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened?
It was awful, absolutely awful. Students in Vienna revolted, so I had to leave my government in the hands of people who wanted to help the workers.
What did the government do?
They freed the serfs. The Hungarian Diet did the same. For the most part, it worked. The serfs didn't seem to even care about the revolution anymore.
But what about the Magyars?
Well, the Hungarian Diet decided to pass these March laws, which mandated many new reforms. They even tried to separate Hungarian state by trying to annex Transylvania, Croatia, and Romania. But those countries weren't having any of it, mainly because of different government and language barriers.
And what about the Czech peoples?
Those crazy nationalists demanded that the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia permitted to constitute the anonymous Slavic state with the empire. They called a Congress of Slavs under the leadership of Francis Paliki, which demanded national equality. Spoiler alert, it never happened.
And which of your other territories were rebellious?
The northern Italians started rebelling too. It was so bad that my commander, Radetzky, had to retreat. But King Charles Albert of Piedmont aided the rebels. The Habsburg Empire started losing at first, but then Radetzky came back, and we kept the Italian territory stable for a while. Long story short, I had to abdicate. The empire was just too much of a hot mess for me. I gave the power to my nephew, Francis Joseph, and he managed to keep the empire together because of the divisions amongst our enemies.
Well, thank you, Emperor Ferdinand. It's been real. I'm now talking to Pope Pius IX. Pope, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened in Italy?
Well, as you know, the northern Italians revolted unsuccessfully. Many of the Italians had hoped they would win, and it was a bit of a disappointment that they didn't. So they vested their liberal hopes in me. I had a liberal reputation, after all, and reformed the administration of the Papal States.
But then what happened?
The people were really hoping that I'd be able to form a stable nation. But then I had to flee to Naples for refuge. Radicals in Piedmont forced the king to renew war against Austria, and after a second loss, he abdicated in favor of his son, Victor Emmanuel. From there, Rome quickly fell to the French, who feared a united Italy. I quickly renounced my liberalism and became a serious arch-conservative.
Well, thank you for your time, Pope Pius.
And thank you. Godspeed.
The final person I'll be talking to today will be Frederick William IV. Frederick, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened in Germany?
The large population disturbances erupted in Berlin. I refused to turn my troops on the Berliners, though. I even offered limited reforms. I called for a Prussian constituent to write a constitution. I then approved David Huntsman as my cabinet. Eventually, I proclaimed my own constitution, which offered me 3-caste voting. All adult males could vote, but the amount of say they had was different among the different social classes. I like to think it was successful, so much so that it lasted till 1918.
And what can you tell us about the Frankfurt Parliament?
Basically, they had no idea they wanted to write a liberal constitution for the united Germany, but they ultimately were unable to offer meaningful legislation for workers. And then there was difficulty around the Grossendeutsch solution, to include Germany and Austria, or the Kleinensdeutsch, which excluded Austria. They turned to me, though, and I rejected the crown the Germans offered me, so they began to dissolve from there, and ultimately failed worse than they originally imagined.
Thank you, Frederick, for your insight.
We hope these man-on-the-street interviews which you heard provided more insight into the revolutions of 1848. Though violent, these revolutions had, in the opinion of our interviewers, a positive impact on the European continent. Though to the naked eye they appeared to be unsuccessful, the resounding nationalism which arose as a result of these revolutions helped solidify the political unification of Germany and Italy over the next 2 decades. Furthermore, as mentioned by Emperor Ferdinand, once he fled, the government put in place in the Habsburg Empire freed the serfs in their nation and helped them politically and economically. An inspired Russian nation would later do the same, freeing the serfs in their country. Over the next 20 years, France would be encouraged by the foundation established by the revolutionaries to enact universal male suffrage. In Denmark, seeing what occurred based on their revolutions, King Frederick VII would meet the liberal demands and establish a new constitution which forced him to share power with the bicameral parliament known as the Riksdag. Further, in the Netherlands, the revolutions would lead King William II to revise the Dutch constitution and would ultimately contribute to Holland's emergence as a constitutional monarchy in the future. In this way, the revolutions of 1848 enabled massive reform throughout the European continent and were clearly beneficial. We hope that in watching these interviews, you've gained new insight into the revolutions of 1848. In our next episode, we'll be examining the age of nation-states. Stay tuned.